Leadership battle for Britain's Labour Party. Tell us about left-of-centre politics in the UK and elsewhere in the world. If the polls are correct, then the veteran MP Jeremy Corbyn is set to become the new Labour leader this month. He is the most left-wing of the four contestants. So after a huge defeat for Labour in May's general election and a big swing to the Conservatives, wouldn't Labour and other similar parties in Europe be more popular with voters by holding to the centre ground? My guests represent different wings of the Labour Party: former London Mayor Ken Livingstone and Charles Clarke, who was a Labour cabinet minister in Tony Blair's government. Charles Clarke and Ken Livingstone, welcome to HARDtalk. Charles Clarke, why would you be worried if Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party?
For two reasons. The essential one is policy. I think that the policies he puts forward don't allow the kind of solutions to our international problems which dominate us in so many countries in the world. Second, electability. I believe a test for any political leader, not only Labour actually, in Britain, is to pass the test of being economically credible and able to convince the people of the country that you could run the economy with confidence. And I don't believe he could pass that test.
Ken Livingstone, let's take that second point about electability. He has got to appeal, if he were Labour Party leader, not just to Labour Party supporters, but to a wide spectrum of voters. We saw the British electorate shift rightwards in the general election. He's got to win those kind of people over.
Well, I'm not certain they shifted rightwards. I don't think we had a credible economic alternative to the Tories. We sounded a bit like
Well, they did shift rightwards, hang on, because the Conservative Party gained 24 seats in the last general election.
It wasn't a great shift. In fact, Labour's vote went up.
By 1.5%.
The Liberals collapsed and largely went over. I think what inspires me about Jeremy Corbyn, he has, when you go and look on his website, really detailed economic strategy. How do we pay to modernise our economy? Our transport system's rubbish, our broadband system's much slower than much of the Far East. And he's talking about using quantitative easing, the Bank of England creating money to actually invest, not borrowing. And that's the key. I think we went into the last election talking about we might borrow a bit more to do investment. People think we're already too much in debt, and I think we've got to show we can bring down the debt at the same time as we modernise our economy.
But the question was, is he going to appeal to voters across a wide spectrum? The 4 million in the UK who voted for UKIP, the UK Independence Party, for instance.
If you look at the polling, 2/3 of UKIP voters prefer Jeremy because I think he speaks in an ordinary way. I mean, far too much of the politics, not just here in Britain, but in America, has been almost like, people have been told to say this, say that. They're worried about what the pollsters say. Jeremy Corbyn just says what he believes to be right. That comes over.
I think the reason why UKIP supporters like Jeremy is very straightforward. There's a large number of people in the country, at least 20%, and you'll see the same in America, in Greece, in Spain, who've lost confidence in the main democratic parties to solve the problems they experience, whether it's economic problems, immigration, welfare reform, ageing society, climate change. And so they cast around for who is it could possibly lead them down a direction of making that go. I think that's the explanation of Syriza's success in Greece, even though it was not a success when it came around to actually doing anything. It's the reason for the Front National success, the National Front success in France. It's the reason for the Bernie Sanders success
in the United States,
and
for the Democrat Party.
And all of these are people who are fed up with the existing political system, frustrated, in some cases for good reason. So I say it's a wake-up call to the mainstream politicians.
Well, there you are then. You're arguing for Jeremy Corbyn, because in a way his principles do appeal to the disadvantaged in many ways.
I'm not arguing for Jeremy Corbyn. I'm arguing that the mainstream politicians have to buck their ideas up. And I think a criticism of this particular Labour leadership election is that the other candidates haven't performed strongly.
I completely agree with Charles on that. I think all over, certainly the Western world, for the last 35 years, there's been this neoliberal agenda of deregulating the banks, ignoring our manufacturing base, not building good homes for ordinary people, and right the way across the world, there's this anger. It's turning to Bernie Sanders in America, it's coming behind Jeremy here. People think there's this political elite
and to
in
the
every
right wing,
well,
Ken, not just
and,
to,
and
not to the,
we don't know if we're going to see a
wing.
President Bernie Sanders, let's face it, nor a President Marine Le Pen in France. But Charles, to you, Jeremy Corbyn has spoken of gross inequalities. He was quoted in one newspaper saying, "I'm looking at the gap in every organisation between the highest and lowest levels of pay." He's very much trying to appeal to those groups that feel disenfranchised, dispossessed, disadvantaged, and he's quite effective of that, and you've got to pay heed to that, surely.
You have to pay heed to it, and he has been quite effective. But where I now disagree with Ken is I think the answers that are put forward to these kinds of problems that are being described, whether it's inequality or whatever it might be, have to be coherent, workable, achievable. Otherwise, he is leading, like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, people down a completely blind path. Just to give a very contemporary example, Syriza and Mr. Tsipras did exactly that. They pushed people on, and then as a result, because they couldn't deliver on their rhetoric, delivered for the Greek people a far, far, far worse result than would have been the case if Syriza hadn't been elected. And that's the danger. It is a danger of electability with Jeremy, but it's also a danger of, do his economics add up? And despite what Ken said a moment ago, I don't think they do.
Well, I think.
Well, I just say very quickly, he believes in printing money, doesn't he? As you say, quantitative easing.
We've just printed
renationalisation of the railways.
We've just printed.
And just explaining to some people who may not know.
We just printed our bank £375 billion to prop up the banks after the crash. Same thing happened in America. Euro's done quite so much. It hasn't caused inflation. Hasn't damaged the economy.
No, but the Bank of England's now thinking of reversing that policy and actually tightening its monetary policy.
At a time where we have economic growth, which we have at the moment, your policy becomes a total disaster.
Not only if you've got full employment, then that would be a problem. But full employment is when you get unemployment down to 2%. And right the way across the world, a whole lot of people have been left behind. They don't get good jobs anymore. When I left school, every boy in my school got a job. 2 or 3 years later, that job paid them enough to keep a family. That world's been swept away, and it's largely because Tony Blair and Bill Clinton in America followed the economic agendas of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Now, if you look, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, all are now admitting the growth of inequality in advanced economies is undermining our growth. A situation in which the richest people earn, 100 times what the poorest do, holds back the economy.
But you know now, Ken Livingstone, you see that there are so many parties here, the Conservative Party, for instance, centre-right everywhere, saying we are the party that truly represent the working class. With your argument saying we want to work for those who are the most dispossessed, who suffer the greatest inequalities, that Labour Party will end up representing an underclass as opposed to the working class. Jonathan Freeland wrote in The Guardian that the danger is that approach would leave Labour as the party of worklessness and welfare.
It's not just the poor. If you look, middle-class jobs have been squeezed. It's not just the poor people that are worse off. I mean, the top 10%, I imagine me and Charles are in it, we've done very well. But that middle class are squeezed as much. And a middle class family now is worrying, will my son or daughter ever earn enough to be able to buy a home?
That squeezed middle rhetoric, Ken, is precisely Ed Miliband's rhetoric up to the last generation.
Labour Party leader who
the Labour leader who just stepped down after losing. He argued that squeezed middle point very strongly. It didn't cut it, even with exactly the people you're talking about, because it had no credibility.
He specifically rejected the proposal that we print money in order to get investment.
And thank God he did.
The single most important factor in getting economic success is investment in infrastructure.
Can I just ask you, Charles, though, that, you said you are suspicious of Jeremy, or you are sceptical of Jeremy Corbyn's economic policies and so on, but is there perhaps some unjustified suspicion of what he would actually do if he were Labour Party leader? I mean, he has said, for instance, my door is always open to big business. None of them been in touch yet. He said he has no plans to impose new taxes on the City of London, though he would bring back the top 50 pence top rate of income, and he says he would offer appointments to a very wide